As God's love coming down over us. This morning it's an honor to privilege to introduce our guest speaker for this week, J.R. Briggs. I remember the first time I met J.R. was the first day that I moved here. I was moving into my house in Lansdale on the West Ward, where J.R. lives with his family. And J.R. drove up, and actually some of you seniors may still remember that, who were helping me to move that day. J.R. came in and welcomed me to the neighborhood. And since then, a little bit that I've gotten to know of J.R., that is an example of who he is. He's very warm and welcoming, and he makes you feel valued and at home wherever you are. So we're very delighted to have you, J.R., here this morning and this week here with us. J.R. is a pastor or cultural cultivator at the Renewed Community, a church here in Lansdale. And when J.R. is not here among us, you can find him in his natural habitat. Maybe a Saturday morning at the farmer's market, like I met him this past Saturday here in Lansdale. I met him there with his family, his wife Megan, and two beautiful young boys, Carter and Bennett. So J.R., we are looking forward to what you have to share with us here this morning. My prayer is that our hearts would be open, our ears would be open to what the Spirit is saying through you here this morning. Welcome.
Well, it's great to be with you all here this morning. Thank you, John, for that introduction. As John mentioned, I live in Lansdale. I live in the center of Lansdale with my family. And I'll show you just a brief picture of my family because they're so important to me. We can go ahead and put that slide up on the screen if you don't mind. This is my family here. Carter's the oldest and Bennett is our youngest. And my wife, Megan, is fantastic. I outpunted my coverage, meaning I married up, as they say. And my wife, Megan, just completed the Philly half marathon yesterday. So she almost fell out of bed in soreness this morning, but she's doing quite well. So, as John said, I pastor a church in Lansdale. Our church is so uncool, we don't even own a building. We meet at the North Penn Boys and Girls Club on Main Street. And I know that when you talk to high school students, you really only need to talk about three things. Sex, the end times, and will there be sex in the end times? So I won't be talking, unfortunately, about those three topics, but I will be talking for this week about something of incredible significance. And it's how you view God. A.W. Tozer said, the most important thing about a person is what they think about God. The most important thing about you is what you think about God, because it impacts every other area of your life. That's why I give my life to talking about these things, exploring these things, walking alongside of people through these things. How you think about God will mark your life forever. Now look, I went to a Christian school. In fact, driving in this morning, this reminds me of the Christian school that I went to. About the same size, about the same facilities, great academic excellence, great athletic programs. And so in many ways, I feel like I know some of you. I don't know Doc well, but I know what some of you may be thinking, what some of you may be experiencing and thinking on a regular basis. Now, I know that Doc is a great place. It has a great reputation in the community, no doubt. But I also know, graduating from a Christian high school, I know that I grew in my faith tremendously during my time. But I also know at times it was difficult for me to follow Christ in my Christian school. Now, I would imagine there's all sorts of individuality in this room, which is great. But I also would imagine there are a few types of people, types of students in this room. There may be some of you that have a vibrant faith with God. You just had an amazing summer, and you just hunger to know more about God. That's fantastic. And some of you may be in another type. You may go to church because your parents force you to go. You may be at Doc because your parents made you to come. Your parents may be more excited you're here at Doc than you are. Now, I know the secret that sometimes Christian schools can be an easy place to actually hide from a true encounter with Christ. How do I know? Because many of my friends were that way. And some of you may be in another category. You may be exploring what a life with Christ looks like. Maybe even for the first time. Maybe this idea of Jesus is so new to you. This just in the last few weeks you've been exposed for the very first time about who he is. And you're wondering what implications he has on your life. And that's great. Regardless of where you're at on your spiritual journey, I want to dare you to lean in and engage with me this week. Because I sense that this is no accident that you're here and that I'm here. And I sense that God may want to actually speak to you, not you as a group entirely, but you as a person. That God has something specifically set apart for you this week. And I wonder what that is. And I wonder if we can pay attention together to see what that might be. To discern that and then respond in the best way that we can. Now this week we're going to be exploring this topic of what does it mean to pay attention to God? What does it mean to discern God's voice? We may have heard that if we've grown up in the church. Oh, I sense God saying this. Or I think we should do this because this is what God's saying. Let me ask you this. Maybe you ask these questions. I ask these questions of myself. What does it mean to hear from God? Is God still speaking? And if so, how do I know it's Him? How do I know it's Him? How do I know it's not just some voice in my head or bad pizza from last night? How do I know it's actually God? So we're going to explore some of that. What does it mean to walk in faith and obedience as we try to listen to the God of the universe? Now, some of you might be thinking, because I've been in these situations before, speaking on a similar topic. Some of you might be thinking, I'm too young. I'm in high school. I don't know this stuff. How would I know what to do? God, I'm sure it works with adults, but not with me. And here's the deal. You are not too young. Did you know that the 12 disciples, the research shows that there's significant reason to believe that the 12 disciples were your age? Did you know that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were your age? Do you know God has a track record of using teenagers to change the world? Don't let anybody tell you, because I'm certainly not going to tell you this week, that you are too young for God to use you. That is not how God works. God will use anybody, regardless of age, who is fully committed to following after Him, no matter what the cost may be. Now, God speaks in a variety of different ways, and we're going to look at several of these throughout the week. He speaks through Scripture, He speaks through nature, other people, in prayers, in our thoughts, maybe sometimes in visions and dreams, in circumstances and in situations. All these are active ways in which God is speaking to us. Now, I have a friend, and one of the things that she does when she gets up in the morning, her feet hit the floor, and she asks herself the question, God, what are we going to do today together? That's a great question. What she's actively saying is, Lord, I anticipate to hear that I'm going to hear from you today. What would it look like if a group of teenagers in this room were able to ask, God, what is it you want me to do today? And we actively anticipated God showing up in the midst of that. Now, we have to be careful, this idea of God speaking to us. How many of you have ever heard somebody say, well, God told me, ... Anybody ever heard that? Yeah? Sometimes that can be really good. Sometimes that can be really dangerous, right? The God trump card, just kind of swap, just thwap it down on the table, right? God told me, right? Now, we got to be really careful with this, okay? Now, I don't recommend this. In high school, I was dating a girl, and I was breaking it off. And I told her the worst thing ever. So guys, don't ever say what I told this girl. God told me I'm supposed to break up with you. Okay? And she shot right back. God told me you're a jerk. So I give her a lot of credit. Okay? But what do we do if God actually shows up? What if He actually wants to meet with you today? So we're going to explore this morning a passage of Scripture where God showed up with someone in the midst of a plant. In the midst of a plant. Many of you, I would suspect, know this story, and I hope that we can explore it more in depth and texture and color in a new way than maybe you've seen it before. So I'm going to ask, if you would, one of the things we do in our church is when Scripture is read is that we stand. Just as if a dignitary or an important person would walk in the room, we would stand as a way of showing respect to that person. Or if someone did something well, we might give them a standing ovation. Or if we're falling asleep, one of the best things to do is to stand up, because blood flows through our bodies, and physiologically we actually pay attention better. So I'm going to ask, as I read Scripture, would you stand? Go ahead and stand right now. I'm going to be reading from Exodus chapter 3. And again, I think you know this, but I'm going to ask that you not put it on cruise control, because I really believe there's something for us here that you haven't heard before. Exodus chapter 3, it says this. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within the bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. These are the words of God. You may be seated. Now there's a really important detail that I missed for years reading this story. And the detail is this. Moses noticed that the bush was burning. And that's what I noticed. It's burning and he goes over to see it. That's not what the text says. It says that it was burning, but it was not burning up. It was on fire, but it was not being consumed. Just like you put fire on a fire pit or some sort of bonfire, after a while you have to suspect those logs are going to turn into ash. Right? If a house is on fire, you have to suspect that that house will burn to the ground. But Moses notices this detail. The weird thing wasn't that the bush was burning, but that the bush wasn't burning up. It just kept burning and burning and burning. So let me give you an example here, okay? So here's the deal. I've got my bush here up on stage, all right? And I'm sure that Moses, when the bush was burning, there were all sorts of Christmas lights all over it as well, just like this one here, okay? And I'm sure it came in this nice wicker basket as well, okay? So if I were to light this on fire, okay? If I were to light this bush on fire, and by the way, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not going to light it on fire. My family this morning requested I not be in jail this week, so I'm going to adhere to that. But if I were to light this bush on fire, how long would it take for you to realize the bush is burning, but it's not actually burning up? 10 minutes? 30 minutes? If it was a bigger bush, maybe 2 hours until lunchtime? How long would it take you to sit there and go, whoa, that thing is just burning and burning and burning, but it is not burning up? This is the detail that Moses notices. In other words, he had to stick around long enough to notice something. And what he was noticing was that it was going and going and going. And you may say, what's the big deal? Hang with me here, because it matters.